I've been a registered nurse for 11 years. I've worked pediatrics, oncology, and general surgery. Nothing prepared me for the 9 months I spent on the night shift at a large regional hospital in the Midwest. I'm not going to name it. People I work with still do, and I don't want any trouble. This happened during my 3rd month there. It was a Wednesday night. I remember because Wednesdays were always quieter. Fewer admissions, fewer families lingering in hallways. By 2 a.m., the floor was still. The kind of still that makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. Room 412 had been empty for 3 days. The patient who'd been in there, an older man recovering from hip surgery, had been discharged that Monday morning. The room had been cleaned, stripped, and left ready for the next admission. Standard procedure. At around 2:15 a.m., I was doing my rounds. I walked past 412 and noticed the call light above the door was on. The little yellow light, blinking slowly. I stopped. I looked at it for a moment. I genuinely thought I was misreading something. The corridor lighting at that hour does something weird to your eyes. But no. The call light was on, in an empty room. I checked my tablet. No patient assigned to 412, nothing in the system. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, just looking at the light. Then I knocked on the door, which I know sounds strange, knocking on the door of an empty room, and pushed it open. The room was dark. I reached in and hit the light switch. Everything looked exactly as it should. Bed stripped to the plastic mattress cover. IV pole pushed into the corner. Visitor chair folded against the wall. No one there. I stepped inside and looked around properly. The bathroom door was slightly open. I pushed it fully open. Empty. I noticed the call button, the small handheld unit attached to a cord by the bed, was lying on the pillow. Not on the bed. On the pillow, positioned exactly where a patient's head would be if someone were lying there. I picked it up and held it. The yellow light above the door went off immediately. I told myself a housekeeper had probably left it there, or maybe it had slipped off the side rail and landed that way. These things happen. I set it on the bedside table and went back to my rounds. At 3:40 a.m., the light came on again. 412. This time I didn't go alone. I got Marcus, one of the other nurses on shift that night. I told him what had happened before, and he gave me the look that people give when they're about to tell you there's a logical explanation for something. We walked down together and pushed the door open. The call button was on the pillow again. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. Then he picked it up, wrapped the cord around it twice, and placed it in the top drawer of the bedside table. We checked the bathroom again, checked behind the door. Nothing. We went back to the station. At 4:50 a.m., the light came on a 3rd time. I didn't want to go back. Marcus said he'd go. He came back 4 minutes later, and I knew immediately from his face that something had changed. He sat down at the nursing station and said, very quietly, "The call button is on the pillow again, and the drawer is still closed." Neither of us went back to that room for the rest of the shift. In the morning, when the day charge nurse came on, I told her about it. She listened, nodded, and said, "Oh, 412. Yeah, that happens sometimes." I asked her what she meant. She said that an elderly woman had passed away in that room about 8 months before I started working there. She'd been alone when she died, no family, no one with her. Staff had found her in the morning. She'd been holding the call button. I transferred floors 4 months later. I still think about that room.
I want to say up front that I've never told this story to most people I know. The ones I have told either don't believe me or wish I hadn't. I'm sharing it now because I think it matters, and because I think some of you will understand it in a way that others can't. I was working a 12-hour night shift at a small community hospital. We had maybe 60 beds, a tight-knit staff, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. It was early November. I remember because there were paper autumn leaves taped to the windows at the nurse's station, which I always found slightly ridiculous in a medical setting, but that's beside the point. We had a patient on the floor. I'll call him Mr. G. He was 74, admitted for pneumonia, and had been declining steadily for about a week. His family had been notified that it was likely a matter of days. His son had visited that afternoon and stayed until about 9 p.m. before leaving for the night. At 11:48 p.m., Mr. G passed away. I was there. It was quiet. He simply stopped breathing. We called it at 11:49, notified the family, and began the necessary procedures. His body was taken from the room by just after 1 a.m. At 1:35 a.m., I was charting at the nursing station when Diane, one of the overnight CNAs, came up behind me and said, "There's a man in Mr. G's room." I turned around. The family was notified. "Are they here already?" She shook her head. "No, it's not family. I don't know who it is. He's just standing there." I followed her down the hall. The door to Mr. G's room was partly open, and I could see the light was on inside, which it shouldn't have been, because we had turned it off after the body was removed. I pushed the door open fully. The room was empty, but it was warm, noticeably warmer than the hallway, which was strange because the hospital kept those rooms cool. And there was a smell, not unpleasant, something like an old wool coat, familiar in a way I couldn't place. Diane was standing right behind me. She said quietly, "He was right there, standing next to the bed. He looked like a patient. Hospital gown, no shoes. I only saw him for a second." We checked the room, the bathroom, the closet where we kept spare linens. No one. I didn't report it. I didn't know what I would even put in an incident report. I wrote in my personal notes that night, "Unexplained light activation in 412 post-patient. Investigated. Nothing found." 3 days later, Mr. G's son came back to collect his father's belongings. I happened to be the one who helped him. While we were in the room, he paused and looked around for a long moment. Then he said, "This might sound strange, but my dad used to say that when it was time, he was going to take one more walk around the place before he left. He said that about every place he'd ever lived. I'll do one last walk through. He was particular that way." He laughed softly, the way people do when they're trying not to cry. I didn't say anything, but I thought about Diane, and I thought about the light.
This is the one I want you to stay for, because it didn't involve anything I could explain away. There was no logical version of this story that I was ever able to construct. This was about 2 years into my night shift work. I was experienced. I was not the kind of person who spooked easily. I want to be clear about that. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. The floor was quiet. I had 5 patients assigned to me that night. Rooms 208, 210, 214, 218, and 221. I knew all 5 by name and condition. I had done my midnight rounds without incident. At 3:07 a.m., I received an alert from the monitoring system. Bed sensor alert. Room 216. I looked at it and frowned. Room 216 was not my assignment. More importantly, room 216 was not occupied. We had no patient in 216. The room wasn't even listed in my system as active. I figured it was a sensor malfunction. They happen. Bed sensors sometimes trigger if a piece of equipment is placed on the mattress, or if maintenance has been in and disturbed something. I made a note to have it looked at and went back to my charting. At 3:19 a.m., the alert came again. Room 216, bed sensor. This time it was followed immediately by a second alert. Patient movement detected. That second alert should not have been possible. Patient movement monitoring only activates when a patient is admitted and their wristband is scanned in the system. Without a wristband scan, the motion sensors in the mattress pad are inactive. The system is designed that way specifically to avoid false positives. I stood up from my station and walked down the hall toward 216. The door was closed. I put my hand on the handle and stood there for a moment. Then I opened it. The room was dark, but the light from the hallway spilled in far enough that I could see the bed clearly. There was an impression in the mattress, the kind of impression a person makes when they've been lying there, deep, defined. The pillow at the head of the bed was indented as well, but the room was empty. The room was completely empty. There was no one there. I stood in the doorway for a long time. I didn't go in. I don't know why. Some instinct told me not to cross the threshold. I just stood there and looked at that impression in the mattress, and I felt something I haven't felt since I was very small. A total, overwhelming certainty that I was not alone. I went back to the station. I pulled up the room history for 216. The last patient discharged from that room had been a 34-year-old woman. She had been brought in after a car accident and had passed away in that bed 11 days before this night. She had been alone when she died. Her next of kin hadn't made it to the hospital in time. I put in a request for the sensor to be inspected. The technician who checked it the next morning told me there was nothing wrong with it. Every component was functioning correctly. He said, and I remember this exactly, "Whatever triggered this wasn't a malfunction. Something set it off. I just can't tell you what." I left that hospital 6 months later. I work days now at a clinic, small, bright, full of people. I don't work nights anymore. I don't think I ever will again.